The grand hall of the Galactic Council was filled with the quiet hum of alien voices. Every species from across the galaxy had gathered in one place, each sitting in their floating seats around the glowing center platform. It was a place meant for peace and decisions, where words replaced weapons and unity was the ideal they all claimed to uphold. But that day the calm was gone. A distress transmission flickered on the enormous holographic screens that hung above them. The image was shaky, filled with static and noise. At first, the delegates thought it was another minor border raid. Such things happened often on the far edges of the galaxy, but when the picture cleared, a deep silence took over the room. On the screen, a colony world was burning. The surface was covered in smoke and flashes of explosions. The attackers were not unknown. They were one of the most feared species known for their brutal tactics, creatures built for war who thrived on destruction. The council members recognized them immediately. They had wiped out whole systems before. The colony under attack was small, a peaceful settlement with mixed species, miners, traders, scientists, people who had no chance to fight back. The council analysts quickly reviewed the data. The numbers didn't lie. The defenders were hopelessly outmatched. Within minutes, the council declared what they always did in such moments. Evacuation was impossible, and resistance was futile. Another world lost, they thought. Some murmured about negotiations, others about sanctions. But deep down they knew the truth. It was too late. Then the feed changed. A new signature appeared on the sensors, fast, aggressive, and moving straight toward the conflict zone. The analysts looked again, confused. It wasn't one of the major fleets. It wasn't even from the Council's main defense forces. The symbol on the side of the ships was simple, a blue and white insignia that many in the room had only seen in reports. It was human. A wave of mixed emotions filled the hall. Some aliens whispered that humans were reckless. Others claimed they were unpredictable and dangerous. Many had heard the rumors, that they came from a world so hostile that everything on it tried to kill them. Their evolution had been forged through survival, through constant struggle. To some that made them heroes. To others, monsters. Still, the humans had answered the call for help. The transmission zoomed in, and the audience could see the human ships, small compared to most fleets but dense with armor and strange energy readings. They didn't look like the sleek, elegant crafts the Council used. Their ships were practical, rugged, and designed for endurance, not beauty. The humans began to spread out, forming a formation that puzzled many of the Council's tacticians. It didn't look defensive. It didn't even look like a standard battle pattern. For the first few minutes, they didn't fire. They didn't even move closer to the enemy lines. Instead, they scanned, analyzed, and observed. The aliens in the chamber started to murmur louder now. What were they waiting for? The colony was burning, people were dying, and yet the humans were calm. Too calm. One of the senior council members spoke softly into the silence, his voice translated into dozens of languages. They're not hesitating. They're studying. This is what they do before they move. His words made some in the chamber shift uneasily. The humans were known for something the galaxy didn't quite understand, their hunting instinct. Unlike most species who evolved from prey, humans had come from a line of predators. They planned their fights not through aggression, but through patience. They didn't attack without understanding the terrain, the enemy, and the outcome. It was said among the Council's scholars that when humans became quiet, it wasn't out of fear. It was instinct, the kind that came before a strike. The screen showed close-up views of the human fleet's command ship. Inside, officers moved with steady precision. Their faces were calm but focused. No panic, no shouting, no chaos, just quiet coordination. Orders were given in short, clipped sentences, the kind of speech that comes from people who have done this many times before. The council delegates leaned forward. A timer appeared on the tactical display. The human ships began to shift formations slowly, aligning like pieces on a board. The alien invaders continued their assault on the colony, unaware of what was coming. The humans didn't warn them. The calm continued for several long minutes. The council chamber was filled with nothing but the soft hum of the transmission. Delegates exchanged nervous glances. One whispered, "Are they just watching them die?" Another replied, "No, they're waiting for something." The human flagship sent out a single pulse of light, a signal so faint that most of the invaders didn't even notice. And then, the tone in the human ships changed. The soft calm inside the command bridge shifted to something sharper. The silence was replaced with purpose. It was as if the air itself became heavier. The humans didn't roar. They didn't announce their move, but everyone could feel it. Something primal was about to happen. For the first time, the council members saw it happen live. Humanity's quiet calm wasn't mercy. It was the pause before action. The feed zoomed out, showing the fleet from above. The council's analysts scrambled to interpret what they were seeing. The human formation wasn't designed for defense. It was an ambush. The ships weren't running standard tactics. They were acting like a group of hunters surrounding prey. The council chamber grew colder as realization spread. These weren't soldiers responding to a battle. These were predators entering a hunt. One of the younger delegates whispered, "But they can't win against those odds." An older ambassador beside him shook his head slowly. "They don't plan to win in numbers. They plan to win in instinct." The humans had analyzed every movement of the enemy fleet, their attack pattern, their communication frequency, their blind spots. Now that they understood their prey, they were ready. Inside the council chamber, everyone could feel the shift. The humans were no longer observers. They were predators about to strike. But even then, there was something strange about it. There was no hate in their faces, no joy, no vengeance. It was survival, cold, deliberate, and absolute. The council sat frozen, eyes fixed on the screen. No one spoke. The last thing they saw before the feed cut to static was the human ships accelerating together in perfect formation, silent, coordinated, and terrifyingly precise. The human commander didn't shout any dramatic orders. Only one short word was heard before the battle began. "Engage." The chamber went still. Even though the feed had only shown the beginning, everyone in that hall knew something irreversible had begun. The humans were no longer reacting to the galaxy's chaos. They were stepping into it with purpose. A council member finally broke the silence, his voice low and uneasy. "If this is how they prepare," he said, "then I do not want to see what happens when they truly begin." No one answered him. The council's decision to call the colony lost now seemed foolish, because humanity had arrived. And when humans arrived, they didn't just fight. They adapted. They hunted. They survived. For the first time in galactic history, the rest of the council saw why humanity's homeworld was called a death world. It wasn't because they were born to destroy. It was because they had learned to thrive where everything else tried to end them. And now that same instinct was being broadcast across the stars, live to every species watching. What they saw that day would change how the galaxy looked at humans forever. They weren't just another new race among the stars. They were something older, something that had learned long ago that hesitation meant extinction. The calm before their fury wasn't peace. It was the silence before the storm, and the storm was already on its way. The human ships floated in formation, their engines glowing softly against the darkness of space. Inside the Galactic Council Hall, every delegate stared at the live feed in silence. The tension was thick. The humans hadn't moved yet. Their ships just stayed there, steady and quiet, watching the chaos unfold below. The alien forces continued to bombard the colony planet. Explosions lit up the surface like angry stars. The council chamber filled with worried murmurs. Many delegates couldn't understand why the humans were still holding back. To them, it looked like hesitation, but anyone who truly knew humanity could see something different. It wasn't fear. It was focus. Inside the human command ship, the bridge lights were dim. Every console was alive with data. The crew moved calmly, their voices low but firm. They weren't wasting energy on panic. They were studying the enemy's every move. Each pilot, each ship, each system, all perfectly synchronized. No one shouted. No one argued. Orders were given in short, sharp words. And behind that silence there was purpose, the kind that only comes when instinct and training work together. Back in the council chamber, one of the older ambassadors leaned forward and said quietly, "This is not hesitation. This is the calm before the strike." Several younger delegates turned to him confused. He explained in a low tone, "Humans come from a world where the smallest mistake means death. Their predators learn to wait. Their hunters learn to plan. When they stop moving, that's when you should worry most." The others looked back at the screen, unease spreading through the hall. The idea of a predator that could wait patiently and then strike with precision was something most of them had never faced. The transmission shifted, showing human sensors tracking the alien fleet. Every enemy ship was marked with faint blue icons. The humans were mapping them, positions, energy readings, weapon types. They were building a picture of the hunt. Minutes passed. The alien attackers, unaware they were being watched so closely, focused on the burning colony below. They thought no help was coming. Then one of the human ships moved, just a small adjustment in its position, almost invisible on the wide display. Another ship followed, then another. The formation began to tighten. The council's tactical observers noticed it first. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand what the humans were doing. It wasn't a standard defensive pattern. It looked more like a trap closing in. The human commander finally gave the order to open a channel. A calm voice went out over the system. "All units ready. Lock targets. No wasted fire." There was no emotion in that voice, just control. Every ship adjusted its aim. The alien fleet still hadn't noticed. Their sensors were focused downward, toward the planet. On the council floor, several delegates were now leaning forward in suspense. The air was thick with anticipation. The humans still didn't fire. Seconds stretched into long, unbearable moments. The silence was so deep that even the faint hum of the council chamber seemed loud. Everyone could feel that something was coming, a storm building quietly in the dark. And then it happened. One word echoed through the command bridge. Now. The stars themselves seemed to blink. The human ships came to life in perfect coordination. Beams of light cut through the darkness, missiles streaked across the void, and the first enemy ships exploded before they even realized they were under attack. Inside the council hall, gasps filled the room. The display showed the human fleet moving with impossible precision. Every shot found its target. Every ship covered the others. There was no chaos, no panic, just pure synchronization. It was like watching a pack of predators move together, each one knowing exactly when and where to strike. But what truly shocked the council was not the firepower. It was the control. The humans didn't waste a single missile. They didn't fire randomly. They didn't let anger guide them. Everything was calculated. The alien fleet tried to respond, but it was too late. The humans were already moving again. They didn't stay in one place. They adapted instantly, shifting tactics as if they could predict what their enemies would do before they even did it. To the council, it was unsettling, like watching instinct and strategy blend into one unstoppable force. One observer whispered, "They fight like hunters. They don't just attack. They anticipate." The battle continued. The enemy fleet began to split, trying to confuse the humans, but the humans didn't chase. They redirected calmly, closing in on smaller groups, isolating them, cutting them down piece by piece. From the council's point of view, it was less like a war and more like watching a hunt unfold in slow motion. The humans didn't fight for glory or chaos. They fought to end it efficiently. At one point, the alien ships tried to flee behind a nearby moon. The council thought the humans would pursue, but instead, the human commander ordered all ships to hold position. They waited. The council analysts were confused again. "Why aren't they following?" one of them asked aloud. The answer came seconds later. The alien ships reappeared from behind the moon, thinking they were safe, and flew straight into a trap. Human ships had already predicted their escape route and placed mines in advance. The moment the enemy fleet entered the field, silent explosions lit up the darkness. The council chamber erupted with shocked voices. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They simply adjusted their formation again, preparing for the next move. Inside the council hall, one delegate turned to another. "Do you see it now?" she asked. "They aren't improvising. They planned every step before we even started watching. The other delegate nodded slowly. It's not war to them, it's instinct. The alien fleet, realizing their losses, began to retreat. They sent distress signals trying to regroup. But the humans didn't chase blindly. They tightened their line, protecting the colony world first. Human transport ships began moving toward the surface, sending aid teams and drones to rescue civilians, even while the battle above continued. That small act, protecting others while still fighting, caught the attention of the Council. Most species fought for dominance. Humans fought to protect. It was strange to see such balance. A species capable of deadly precision and yet so focused on saving lives. The camera feed zoomed in on the colony surface. Human landing craft descended through the smoke and chaos. Teams in armored suits ran through the ruins, pulling survivors out from the wreckage, offering water, food, and medical aid. There was no hesitation in them, only purpose. In the sky above them, the human fleet continued to push the attackers back. The tide of the battle was turning. The Council members could hardly believe what they were witnessing. A world they had already declared lost was now being saved before their eyes. But there was also something deeper, something unsettling. The calmness of the humans, the way they moved, the quiet focus before and during battle, it all carried an edge that no other species had. They were not fearless, but they acted like fear was something they had learned to control long ago. One alien observer said softly, "They were not made for peace, but they choose it. That's what makes them dangerous." No one argued. The feed continued to show flashes of light, explosions fading as the enemy forces broke apart. What began as a hopeless defense had become a coordinated counterstrike. And through it all, the humans never shouted victory. They just kept moving, clearing debris, rescuing people, repairing damage, making sure every survivor was accounted for. Back in the council chamber, the tension started to ease, replaced by awe. The delegates exchanged glances, realizing that they were witnessing more than just a rescue mission. They were watching a lesson in how far humanity had come, from a violent, unpredictable world to a civilization that had turned those instincts into discipline. As the battle wound down, the human fleet began to regroup. They didn't pursue the remaining enemy ships that fled into deep space. Instead, they stayed to help the wounded and secure the area. The humans had no interest in conquest. They just made sure the danger was gone. The council finally exhaled after what felt like hours of holding their breath. One elder delegate leaned back in his seat and said quietly, "They wait like hunters, strike like storms, and then they heal what they can." Those words lingered in the air long after the feed ended. The galaxy had seen many wars before, but never a battle fought with such quiet ferocity. The humans had shown something different that day, a kind of strength that didn't come from hate or glory, but from understanding survival itself. The council realized that this was only the beginning. Humanity had arrived among the stars, and they had brought their instincts with them, the patience of hunters, the courage of survivors, and the heart of protectors. And somewhere, deep in the minds of every alien who had watched, a new thought began to take root. If humans could stay this calm before battle, what would happen if they were ever truly pushed? The battle in orbit wasn't over, but it was no longer one-sided. The humans had turned the tide, and now the enemy fleet was starting to fall apart. Their formation had broken. Their lines of communication were jammed. They fired wildly into empty space, not realizing that every random shot only revealed their position more clearly to the human sensors. Inside the Galactic Council Hall, every alien delegate sat glued to their seat. The silence was deep, almost eerie. Nobody dared to speak. They were witnessing something that defied every rule of war they had known. The humans weren't just fighting. They were moving like they already knew the end of the battle before it began. And then it happened. The switch. The humans had studied, waited, and observed long enough. Now the patience was gone. The calm that had filled their movements earlier had shifted into something colder, sharper. The moment the human commander gave the next order, everything changed. The feed showed the human ships accelerate in perfect unison. It was beautiful in a strange, terrifying way. No wasted motion, no confusion. It was as if every pilot shared the same mind. They moved as one. Inside the council chamber, a quiet gasp spread through the audience. The alien delegates had seen many military actions before, but none like this. The humans didn't just attack, they hunted. They anticipated where the enemy would move next and were already there before the aliens arrived. To most species, war was a matter of defense, numbers, and positioning. To humans, it was something more primal. It was instinct. The enemy tried to retreat. They turned their ships to escape, engines burning hot. But the humans had already expected that. Their ships didn't chase blindly. Instead, they circled. They created zones, invisible traps, where any movement would be met with devastating precision fire. The galaxy had never seen such control. The council chamber was filled with the distant hum of translated voices whispering to one another. Some of the older ambassadors recognized what they were seeing, though they could hardly believe it. The humans were using tactics far older than space travel, patterns learned from their ancestors who once hunted across forests, oceans, and deserts. Those instincts hadn't vanished with time. They had evolved. Each human ship seemed to play a specific role. Some chased and cornered. Others waited quietly, motionless, until the prey entered their path. The aliens watching didn't understand how something so violent could look so deliberate. One delegate spoke softly, his voice trembling slightly. "They aren't soldiers," he said. "They're hunters." The others turned toward him, unsure how to respond. He continued, "They don't fight to destroy. They fight to finish," and that was true. The humans weren't wasting ammunition. They didn't target ships that were already disabled. They simply marked them, disabled their weapons, and moved on to the next target. It wasn't cruelty, it was efficiency. They focused only on the real threat. The enemy fleet began to panic. Their formations collapsed completely now. Some tried to flee toward the nearby asteroid belt. Others powered down their weapons in surrender. But the humans didn't react out of emotion. They simply adapted. Every move they made was calculated. Every shot was planned before it was fired. It wasn't chaos. It was precision born from evolution. On one of the council's secondary screens, smaller feeds showed what was happening closer to the planet's surface. Human dropships were still rescuing civilians, carrying the injured to safety while the main fleet kept fighting above. Even under the worst pressure, they balanced aggression with compassion. It was something that left the council confused and uneasy. One moment, humans looked like unstoppable predators. The next, they acted like protectors. That mix of ferocity and empathy was something no one else in the galaxy quite understood. The council's senior chair turned to his advisors. "They move like beasts when they fight," he said slowly. "But when it's over, they care for the wounded, even the enemy." How does such a species exist? No one had an answer. The camera feed switched again. A close-up view of one of the enemy ships filled the screen. It was massive, the leader of the invading fleet. Its weapons still glowed red. Its armor was scarred but intact. It tried to break through the human lines, moving fast, firing desperately. But the humans had been waiting for this. The flagship of the human fleet adjusted its course. Other ships followed. They didn't rush. They didn't scatter. They just moved with quiet purpose. The enemy's flagship was the predator once, but now it was prey. The humans formed a wall of light and fire around it, cutting off every escape. For a brief moment, the giant alien ship paused, as if realizing what was happening. And then the humans struck all at once. Energy beams cut through its defenses. Missiles hit its engines. The ship trembled, glowing red from the inside before finally going dark. The council hall erupted in a mixture of shock and awe. The enemy's leader had fallen. The entire fleet began to retreat in disarray. But even in that victory, the humans showed restraint. They didn't chase. They didn't destroy the fleeing ships. They let them go. It was as if humanity understood something that others didn't. That true power wasn't just in how much destruction one could cause, but in knowing when to stop. The council's younger delegates looked to their elders, whispering questions. Why do they stop? Why not end it completely? An older ambassador replied quietly, because they've seen too much death before. They don't need to prove anything. The feed from the human flagship showed the crew working silently now, checking systems, counting survivors, sending reports. No celebration, no noise, just focus. Down on the colony surface, human aid teams were setting up shelters. They gave water, medical help, and safety to whoever needed it, no matter the species. The same hands that had launched missiles minutes earlier were now gently lifting wounded civilians onto stretchers. One alien watching whispered softly, "How can they be both hunter and healer?" It was a question the galaxy would ask for generations. As the battle slowly ended, the council chamber remained silent. What they had witnessed wasn't just another military victory. It was a message. Humanity didn't fight for dominance. They fought to protect what they valued. But when forced to fight, they became something no other species could match. Creatures of pure instinct, driven by the raw need to survive and protect. They didn't rely on perfect technology or superior numbers. Their strength came from something far deeper, something that had been carved into their nature by the hardships of their own world. They came from a planet where storms could destroy cities, where wild beasts hunted them for food, where survival meant learning to adapt faster than everything else around them. That same spirit had followed them into space, and now the galaxy was seeing it firsthand. One of the council's advisors finally spoke after a long silence. "We have always seen humanity as unpredictable," he said, his voice calm but thoughtful. "But maybe it's not unpredictability. Maybe it's balance. They've learned to hold mercy in one hand and survival in the other." The others nodded slowly. For the first time, they began to understand why humans frightened so many species. Not because of their weapons, but because of their dual nature. When they were peaceful, they were kind, generous, and loyal. But when they were forced to fight, they became unstoppable. The council chair turned off the holographic feed. The chamber was quiet except for the soft hum of power generators. Every delegate sat in reflection. Finally, one whispered, "When humans go silent, it means the hunt has begun." Those words spread softly across the chamber. No one disagreed. Outside, in the far reaches of space, the human fleet continued its quiet work. They had saved the colony, driven back the invaders, and restored hope to a world that had been written off as lost. And when the last fires on the colony surface faded, the humans didn't stay to receive thanks or honors. They simply prepared to leave. Their job was done. To them, it wasn't about glory or power. It was about doing what was right and surviving to do it again if needed. For the galaxy watching, it was something new. They had seen warriors, conquerors, and defenders before, but never had they seen a species that could hold all those roles at once, and still remain so deeply human. The council members knew this would not be the last time they'd see humanity in action. But one thing had changed forever that day. The galaxy now understood that when humanity's calm broke into silence and their patience turned into motion, there was no escaping what came next. It wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance. It was instinct, raw, ancient, and unstoppable. And for the first time, every corner of the council realized something chilling but true. Humans didn't just survive the universe. They adapted, and when needed, they hunted. The smoke from the battlefield was still drifting through the dark skies above the colony world. Wreckage from destroyed enemy ships glowed faintly, like silent ghosts floating in the cold air of space. The fight was over, but the feeling of it still hung thick. That strange mix of fear, relief, and disbelief that always followed after humans went to war. The Galactic Council was still watching. The transmission hadn't ended. Every delegate, every observer, and every strategist remained frozen in their seats. None of them spoke. They had just seen what happened when humanity decided to act, but the humans weren't finished yet. Even though the enemy fleet was broken and retreating, the human ships didn't relax. They didn't lower their weapons or celebrate their victory. Instead, they moved with the same quiet precision as before, checking every signal, scanning every sector of space, making sure no threat remained hidden. Inside the main command ship, the lights were dim. The crew moved efficiently, speaking in short, calm words. They didn't treat the battle as a victory. They treated it as a job still in progress. To them, being careless after a fight was worse than losing one. Back on the council floor, the delegates began whispering among themselves again. Many of them had fought wars before, but this was different. The humans didn't behave like other species. They didn't fight for pride or revenge or glory. Their silence during and after battle was unsettling, almost unnatural. One of the younger delegates leaned forward and asked quietly, "Why aren't they celebrating?" An older alien beside him shook his head. "Because they know it's not over until everyone is safe. Humans don't measure victory by how many enemies they destroy. They measure it by how many lives they save. That answer stayed in the air like a quiet truth. The screen shifted to a close-up of the human boarding teams. Small dropships were moving through the debris field, heading toward the wrecked enemy vessels. To the Council's surprise, they weren't attacking. They were looking for survivors, even among the enemy. It confused many in the chamber. The same humans who had fought with such fierce power minutes ago were now carefully entering the shattered ships, rescuing wounded enemy soldiers, carrying them out one by one. They treated the injured as if they were their own. It was strange to watch. The same hands that had pressed the triggers now reached out to help. The same people who had unleashed destruction were now offering mercy. The contrast left the Council speechless. One observer said softly, "They don't act like predators anymore." Another replied, "They never stopped being human. That's the difference." Meanwhile, on the surface of the colony, the story was the same. Human ground teams worked tirelessly among the ruins. They didn't rest. They didn't complain. Smoke still rose from broken buildings, but the humans moved through it calmly, guiding survivors, pulling people from collapsed shelters, sharing food and water. Everywhere they went, they carried an air of quiet determination. One of the alien colonists on the ground recorded a message for the Council. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "We thought it was the end." Then the humans arrived. They didn't come with promises or speeches. They just started saving us. That short message played across the Council screens. The silence that followed was heavier than before. For the first time, many of the galaxy's most powerful leaders saw something they hadn't expected: compassion from a species they had once feared. But for the humans, it wasn't about showing compassion or proving anything. It was natural to them. It was simply who they were. Inside one of the human aid ships, medics worked side by side with alien doctors. They treated everyone the same, regardless of species, color, or history. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt metal, but no one paid attention to that. All that mattered was helping whoever was still breathing. In the middle of all this, one of the human officers stood quietly by the window, looking out at the stars. The battle debris drifted slowly past the glass. There was no pride in his eyes, only thoughtfulness, as if he was already thinking about the next step, the next risk, the next life that could be saved. Back at the Council chamber, the feed showed another view, one that made everyone lean forward. A small group of enemy ships had powered up their engines again. They were trying to flee, damaged but still dangerous. The humans noticed instantly. Within moments, several ships from the human fleet adjusted their course, intercepting the movement. The Council expected another violent strike, another display of humanity's cold efficiency. But that's not what happened. Instead, the humans surrounded the fleeing ships and opened a communication channel. The enemy captain's voice came through, broken and filled with fear. He expected threats. He expected anger. What he heard instead was calm. The human commander's voice was steady. "Stand down. You'll be given medical help. You don't have to die out here." The Council chamber went completely silent. No one could believe what they were hearing. Humanity, the same species that had just wiped out a fleet in perfect precision, was now offering help to the same enemy that had attacked them. The alien delegates looked at one another, unsure how to interpret it. To them, this was not normal behavior. Mercy after battle was rare. Forgiveness after bloodshed was almost unheard of. But for humans, it was simple. They believed in survival, for themselves and for others. The enemy captain eventually agreed to surrender. The humans took the crew aboard, treated their wounds, and gave them food and water. They didn't mock or punish them. They didn't speak about revenge. They simply did what they always did. They helped. One of the Council members whispered in disbelief, "How can a race be so fierce in war and yet so kind in peace?" No one answered him. The feed showed a close-up of the human medics working over one of the captured enemy officers. The alien was visibly afraid, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar room. But the human doctor smiled faintly and said, "You're safe now. Try to breathe." That simple moment, small, almost ordinary, carried more power than any speech. It was humanity in its truest form. The Council chair turned off his microphone and whispered to his aides, "We have studied them for decades. We thought we understood their psychology, their culture, their instincts, but we were wrong. He looked up at the big screen again. They are not killers by nature. They are survivors who learned how to fight when they have to. Outside, the last of the enemy ships drifted away, powerless and defeated. The human fleet remained in silent orbit, guarding the colony below. There were no fireworks, no shouts of victory, only quiet repairs and relief efforts. Hours later, as the stars began to brighten again, the council transmission finally ended. But the silence in the chamber continued long after the feed went dark. One of the delegates stood up slowly. "We just witnessed something extraordinary," he said softly. "They didn't only defeat their enemies. They showed the galaxy who they really are," another replied. "Yes. And I don't know which part was more terrifying, their power or their restraint." Those words echoed around the room. It wasn't just the strength of human weapons that had left an impression. It was the strength of their character. Their ability to fight like predators one moment and heal like caretakers the next. The council had seen many wars, many species rise and fall. But this was different. This was humanity showing that they didn't just belong in the galaxy. They were a force it could never fully predict or control. Back on the colony, the survivors gathered around the human relief ships, their eyes filled with gratitude and disbelief. For them, humans weren't monsters or saviors. They were something in between, something real. The ground was still warm from the battle. The air was still thick with dust. But for the first time in days, there was hope. And far above, in the quiet of space, the human fleet drifted like shadows against the stars. Silent, patient, watchful. They weren't resting. They were waiting. Because they knew the universe was dangerous and safety was never permanent. For humans, peace wasn't a pause between wars. It was something they built, protected, and paid for with everything they had. And in that moment, every member of the Galactic Council finally understood what it truly meant when someone said humans were from a death world. It wasn't a curse. It was a warning and a promise. Because if the galaxy ever forgot again what humans were capable of, all it would take was one distress call, one signal, one moment of silence, and humanity would return, calm as ever, ready to protect and, if needed, to hunt once more. The days after the battle were quiet but tense. The galaxy had seen something it could not forget. Every major civilization that had tuned into the Council broadcast replayed the footage again and again. The moment when humanity's fleet arrived, the silence before their strike, and the calm precision with which they saved lives afterward. For most species, wars were chaos and screaming panic, destruction. But for humans, it was method, discipline, and reason. The galaxy couldn't decide if that was comforting or terrifying. The Council's main chamber, once filled with endless chatter, had fallen strangely silent these past few days. Delegates avoided speaking about what they had witnessed. Some were afraid, some were simply unsure of what to think, but everyone felt it. Something had changed forever. The word Deathworlders no longer sounded like an insult or an odd nickname. It sounded like a title, earned, not given. The Council had called a new meeting to discuss what should happen next. The colony was safe, the enemy had surrendered, and the humans had withdrawn to a nearby orbit. But the question now was, what came after this? The chamber filled slowly, each delegate taking their place. The air felt heavy, almost electric. When the humans finally appeared on the main screen, there was an instant silence. Their representative looked calm, tired perhaps, but composed. There was no arrogance in his eyes, no sign of celebration. Only focus. He began to speak in a quiet, firm voice. "The colony is stable. We've transferred food, medicine, and temporary shelters. We're leaving a small defense unit to protect the planet until the local forces can recover. No further action is needed." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, made it sound as if they had simply repaired a broken machine. But the Council knew better. They knew that humanity had just saved an entire world from destruction. One of the Council members leaned forward. "You could have destroyed the enemy completely," he said. "You had the power to erase them. Why didn't you?" The human paused for a moment before replying. "Because we came to save people, not to make more corpses." The chamber went completely silent again. That single sentence carried more weight than any speech could. It was strange how humans could use simple words that struck deeper than all the grand phrases the Council was used to. Their logic wasn't wrapped in politics or pride. It was raw, direct, and undeniably human. Another delegate, more cautious, asked, "Do you understand what your actions mean? The galaxy just watched you unleash your full military strength. Some are frightened." The human gave a small, tired smile. "Then maybe they should remember that we didn't use it against them." That response sent a quiet ripple across the hall. It wasn't a threat, it was a reminder. A reminder that humans didn't fight for power, they fought for purpose. After the meeting, the delegates began whispering among themselves again. Words like balance, power, fear, and hope drifted through the chamber. Many of them had always believed humanity needed to be contained, guided carefully, kept under watch. But now, that idea seemed foolish. You couldn't contain people who saw war as tragedy and peace as duty. Outside the council building, reporters from across the galaxy were waiting. Every species wanted to know what humanity's next move would be. Would they form alliances? Would they demand control? Would they disappear again into their corner of space? But the humans didn't make grand announcements. They didn't parade their victory. Their ships simply stayed where they were, helping rebuild, teaching the colonists how to set up defenses, sharing technology for faster repairs. One alien technician, who worked alongside the humans, later described it best. They never stopped moving. It was like they couldn't rest until everyone else could. Back on the colony, the survivors were rebuilding their homes. The human soldiers had removed their armor and were working with bare hands, lifting beams, repairing water lines, and carrying supplies. To the aliens, this was shocking. Warriors were supposed to leave after battle, not stay to clean up, but humans were different. For them, war wasn't over until life could begin again. One small alien child was seen walking beside a human engineer, trying to carry a tiny toolbox. The image spread across the galaxy, a quiet moment of hope amid destruction. It said more than 1,000 reports ever could. As the days passed, a strange thing began to happen. Species that once avoided humans started reaching out. Messages came from across the stars on offers of trade, requests for cooperation, invitations to talk. The galaxy was beginning to see humans not as monsters, but as protectors. Unpredictable, yes, but honest. Dangerous, yes, but only when forced to be. Back on Earth, when the footage reached home, people didn't cheer. There were no parades. They just felt proud, not of the power, but of what they used it for. One old veteran was interviewed by a news channel. When asked what he thought about the battle, he simply said, "We didn't fight to be feared. We fought so others wouldn't have to." That quote spread everywhere, across human space and beyond. Even on alien worlds, people repeated it in their own languages. It became a quiet anthem of what humanity stood for. But not everyone in the galaxy was at peace with it. Far beyond the Council's reach, other factions watched the recordings too. Some saw human compassion as weakness. Others saw their unity and discipline as a threat. Plans began forming in the shadows. Plans to test humanity again, to see if their strength could be broken. And deep in human command channels, they knew it. They weren't naive. They had lived on a world where everything tried to kill them. Storms, disease, hunger, and each other. They had learned long ago that peace never lasted forever. That's why their fleet stayed alert, scanning the edges of the system, watching for unusual movements, not out of fear, out of habit. Humans were always ready. In one of the observation decks aboard a human carrier, a young crew member looked out at the stars and said quietly, "Do you think they'll ever trust us?" The officer beside him smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But that's okay. We didn't come here to be trusted. We came here to help." That was the human way. Do what's right even if no one understands why. Back in the council chamber, rumors started spreading. Some said the humans were preparing a larger fleet. Others claimed they were expanding their colonies in secret. But those who had seen the humans up close and the ones who had watched them save lives without hesitation knew the truth. Humans didn't seek control. They sought balance till fear had its own voice and not everyone ignored it. One of the council generals spoke privately to his aide. "If they ever turned against us, we wouldn't stand a chance," the aide replied softly. "Then maybe we should make sure they never have a reason to." That line became another quiet truth. Meanwhile, on the colony, life slowly returned to normal. The markets reopened. Families began to rebuild. The smell of smoke faded, replaced by the scent of food and clean air. Everywhere people whispered stories of what had happened. how the humans arrived like shadows, fought like fire, and stayed like friends. The phrase hunter mode became famous, not as a threat but as a symbol. When humans entered hunter mode, they didn't do it for fun or conquest. They did it because something precious was in danger, life itself. And when that danger was gone, they turned back into builders, teachers, healers. That dual nature, the switch between fury and kindness, was what the galaxy struggled to understand. A few council scientists even started researching the human psyche, trying to explain it. But no study could capture what made them unique. It wasn't just biology or evolution. It was choice. Humans chose to care. They chose to fight when it mattered and to forgive when it was harder. That's what made them powerful. By the end of the week, the human fleet prepared to leave orbit. The colonists gathered to watch as the ship slowly ascended into the sky, glowing faintly in the evening light. Some waved. Some simply stood in silence. They all knew they would never forget this moment. One colonist said quietly, "When they came, we thought death had arrived. But it was hope." The transmission of their departure reached the council in real time, and for a brief moment the entire galaxy seemed to pause, watching the ships vanish into the stars. The council chair looked up at the now empty screen and whispered, "Hunter mode." And yet, they hunted only danger, not life. No one replied. But deep inside, every leader knew the truth. Humanity had just rewritten the galaxy's idea of what strength meant. It wasn't about how loud your weapons were. It was about how gently you used them after the noise was gone. And somewhere, far from all the cameras and broadcasts, the human commander looked out at the stars and said quietly to himself, "We'll come when we're called again, and when we do, may it be for the right reasons." He didn't say it for an audience. He said it for humanity, because for them, hunter mode wasn't about anger or power. It was about responsibility, the promise to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And as the stars stretched into streaks and the fleet jumped into hyperspace, one thing became clear to the watching galaxy. The Deathworlders were not monsters. They were guardians, and the universe would never look at humanity the same way again. Time passed. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The stars above the rescued colony now shone peacefully, as if they had never witnessed the storm that once raged across them. The humans had long since departed, leaving behind rebuilt homes, working systems, and a message that lingered in everyone's hearts. You are safe now. But safety, as everyone learned from the humans, was not something you waited for. It was something you created. The people of that colony carried on with a new sense of strength. They had seen death up close. They had seen fear, destruction, and fire, yet they had also seen what humanity truly was, a force that could fight like thunder and heal like sunlight. Children grew up hearing stories of the Deathworlders who came from a dangerous planet and brought life back to theirs. The story spread across the galaxy faster than light. In small markets, in schools, in bars, even in the quiet halls of governments, people whispered the same thing. Did you see what the humans did? At first, it was just a story, a tale retold with awe and disbelief. But then something changed. Other colonies began to reach out to Earth, not for war, not for trade, but for guidance. They wanted to learn how humans stayed united through chaos, how they could face disaster with courage instead of fear. And humanity answered, not with fleets this time, but with teachers, engineers, and doctors. Ships that once carried weapons now carried medicine, food, and knowledge. Where soldiers had once marched, builders now stood. The galaxy had seen humanity's hunter mode, that terrifying precision and strength. But now, they were seeing the other side of it, the heart that guided it. On Earth, the footage of that fateful battle was preserved in every archive. It became part of history, not because of the violence, but because of what came after it. It reminded people who they were and what they stood for. One of the council members, an old alien leader who had watched the event live, decided to visit Earth in person. He was nervous at first. He expected cold, emotionless warriors. Instead, he was welcomed with warmth and laughter. He saw children running in the parks, families sitting together, and people working side by side. Ordinary lives filled with care. There was nothing monstrous about them. They were just human. He finally understood the truth. Humanity wasn't strong because of its weapons or its technology. It was strong because of its spirit. Because every human carried within them both fire and compassion, a balance that few other species had learned to hold. When the alien leader addressed the Earth Assembly, his voice trembled slightly. "You taught the galaxy a lesson we had forgotten," he said. "That mercy is not weakness, and power means nothing without heart." The hall erupted in quiet applause, not loud or showy, but sincere. It wasn't a victory speech. It was an acknowledgement of something deeper, the quiet strength that lived in every human soul. Far away, in deep space, the human fleets continued to patrol. Not as conquerors, but as guardians. Every time a distress signal echoed through the void, they answered. Not for reward, but because that was what they did. One distress call came from a mining world near the edge of known space. A natural disaster had struck and thousands were trapped underground. The local systems didn't have enough resources to help. But before the council could even debate sending aid, human ships were already on the move. They didn't wait for approval or recognition. They just acted. When the first rescue ship landed, miners who had lost hope saw the familiar symbol of Earth painted on its side. Many of them cried right there in the dust and smoke. One of them said, "We knew they'd come. Humans always come." That phrase began spreading, like a quiet promise whispered across the stars. Humans always come. It became a saying that even children repeated in times of danger. It meant hope. It meant safety. It meant that somewhere, someone was watching, ready to help. Back in the council chambers, the talk about humans changed completely. No one dared to call them unpredictable anymore. Now they were called reliable. Some even said they were the galaxy's silent guardians, the ones who appeared when everyone else froze in fear. But even as humanity's reputation grew, they never let it go to their heads. They didn't build monuments or boast about their strength. They simply kept doing what they had always done, surviving, protecting, rebuilding. On one of the space stations where survivors from many worlds lived together, a festival was held to honor those who helped during the Great Colony Crisis. When the time came to honor the humans, the crowd stood up in silence. No speech was made, no ceremony was needed. Just a moment of gratitude, and in that silence, everyone understood that sometimes respect didn't need words. Meanwhile, deep in space on a quiet observation deck of a human vessel, one officer stood looking at a holographic map of the galaxy. Each blinking light represented a colony, a home, a life. He wasn't thinking about glory or power. He was thinking about how fragile it all was, how easily everything could vanish if someone didn't stand watch. He turned to his crew and said softly, "As long as there's life out there, we'll keep answering." That simple promise summed up the human spirit better than any declaration could. Back on Earth, a group of children watched a recording of the first battle, the one that started it all. They saw the ships, the fire, the danger. But when the recording ended, what caught their attention wasn't the fight. It was the part after, where humans were rescuing others, carrying survivors, offering help. One child asked, "Why did they help the enemy too?" The teacher smiled gently and said, "Because humans know what it means to be scared and alone, and no one deserves that." The classroom went quiet as the children thought about it. It was a lesson that would shape the next generation. Over the next few years, something remarkable began happening. Mixed crews, humans and aliens together, started forming across fleets, research teams, and colonies. The fear that once existed slowly turned into trust. The galaxy began to heal from its old divisions. And it all started with one moment, the day the Council witnessed humanity's hunter mode. But here was the irony. That hunter mode, everyone feared, wasn't about rage or destruction. It was about protection, an instinct older than civilization itself. When humans went into hunter mode, it wasn't to kill, it was to stop harm. It was to make sure that no one else had to feel helpless. That realization spread across the stars. Many species began to adapt the human philosophy. They started training not just to fight, but to protect. Rescue fleets were formed under human guidance. New alliances were born, ones built not on fear but on shared duty. One of the council analysts wrote in a report, "Humanity doesn't just react to danger. They transform it. They turn chaos into order, fear into unity. And that was exactly what had happened. The galaxy had learned something from the humans, that true power wasn't about domination. It was about responsibility. In the years that followed, every time a council meeting began, a small emblem of Earth was displayed at the top of the hall, a reminder of the day the galaxy saw humanity as it truly was. Not monsters. Not just warriors, but guardians. Even now, whenever distress signals echoed through the far corners of space, the same words were whispered across countless worlds. Call the humans. They'll come. And they always did. Sometimes it was a small team. Sometimes it was an entire fleet. But the result was always the same. People were saved. Hope was restored and life went on. Far from the council's reach, on a quiet night aboard a human patrol ship, one of the crew members stared at the endless stars and said softly, "Maybe one day they won't need us anymore." The captain, standing beside him, smiled. "That's the goal," he said. "To build a galaxy where no one needs saving." The young crew member nodded. But until then, the captain looked out into the void, endless, beautiful, dangerous. Until then, we'll keep watching. The stars outside shimmered like tiny fires in the dark, and the hum of the engines filled the silence. Humanity was still out there, and still watching, still ready. They didn't wait for glory. They didn't ask for thanks. They simply waited for the next call, because that's what humans did. And somewhere in the heart of the galaxy, those who once feared them now slept peacefully, knowing that if danger ever returned, the Deathworlders would awaken again, not out of hatred, not out of vengeance, but out of love, the fierce, unbreakable love that defined humanity from the very beginning. The kind of love that could move mountains, silence fear, and change the fate of worlds. And so the story ended where it began, with a signal in the dark and the quiet voice of someone whispering, "This is a distress call. Is anyone listening?" And somewhere among the stars, humanity answered, calm, steady, unstoppable, "We're here."